the state attorney general standing up, talking about this is the law that should exist, that there shouldn't be a right of any one of us who are listening to bring a case to enforce the Voting Rights Act. If somebody has discriminated against us, that we have no private right of action, that the governor is supporting this nonsense. But what I thought, Denise and Joshua, what I found so ugly, Daryl, is that there were 14 states that supported this position, who wanted to make sure that this was the law of the land so that they can try to convince other circuit courts and ultimately the Supreme Court that none of us can bring a private right of action to vindicate our rights if they're being denied on the basis of racial discrimination, that these people are doing this. And let's talk about that. What does it mean to have right now in this country seven states where people who were born post-1965 have lesser rights than their parents, lesser rights than their grandparents? What does it mean that we're in an era where people can have fewer rights in the voting rights arena than their own parents had? Denise?
It's just shocking, and it is a direct fallout of the Shelby decision 10 years ago that opened the floodgates. And frankly, the Supreme Court gave a permission slip to states to politicize this process and letting them know that they weren't going to be held accountable. And that's what we have seen happen continuously since that decision came down. And look, what we're seeing right now in the U.S. Supreme Court is a politicization of the Supreme Court itself that has also given a permission slip to states around the country to politicize their own justice departments, their own attorney general's offices. And they are doing this for their own political gain in order to be able to impose gerrymandered districts, just like Arkansas did. Look, we're seeing it all over the country. Just last year, we watched a case from Alabama with heavily gerrymandered districts go up to the Supreme Court. And while the court left the Voting Rights Act intact in that case, it's still, they're still fighting about those district lines in Alabama. Look, what we know is that since the fall of preclearance, of the 100 or so new voting laws that have come into place in the last decade, a huge proportion of them are in those states that have the history of discriminatory voting practices. So it's very clear that the Voting Rights Act was doing exactly what it was supposed to do and prevent those discriminatory laws from going into effect. That state attorney generals would file briefs arguing that individuals should not be able to bring these lawsuits is nothing but political expediency in order to be able to rig the system without accountability. And that's why we have to fight back. That is why we have to fight back at all levels. We have to continue bringing these cases. This case is going to have to go to the Supreme Court, it appears, because of the conflict between the circuits. And we have to do things like what we're doing in Missouri, which is we're bringing cases under our state constitution, which affords even greater protections for the right to vote. And we just can't stop. We know that our ancestors didn't stop. Those before us didn't stop, even in the face of significant barriers. We know that justice has to prevail. And this comes from not just staying involved in the courts, but building that grassroots movement, building the kind of movement that you are doing at the Transformative Justice Coalition to take people out, because we know that until the people demand their rights, that politicians who benefit from exclusion and white supremacy aren't going to let go of their foothold on power.
And, Denise, it's very interesting that you point out that you're using the state constitution now as the sword to fight voter suppression and the lines and unconstitutional actions of the drawing of maps. I got to ask you a practical question, if you don't mind, and that is this. So with what the Eighth Circuit judges have now done in making that decision that only the U.S. Attorney General's Office or Department of Justice can bring an action under Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, if you're in Arkansas or Iowa or Minnesota or Missouri or Nebraska, North or South Dakota, and you want to bring a suit right now, do you have the ability right now to do it? I mean, is the decision on stay, or is it now imposed if you're in one of those states at this point in time today?
Yeah, that's a great question. In fact, I have a case right now in federal court in Missouri under the Voting Rights Act. We're co-counseling with the Mexican American Legal Defense and Education Fund and the ACLU, challenging Missouri's restrictions on providing assistance for voters that Section 208 of the Voting Rights Act requires. And we're in a little bit of a holding pattern, I got to say. The clear language of this decision seems to say that we don't have a basis to bring this case. And I'll tell you what, if I'm bringing a new case tomorrow, I'm not filing it in federal court in Missouri.
And that's so important, Daryl, Joshua, Denise. We got to be clear that not every state has a good state constitution. Let's be very clear. Not every state has a constitution that you can use to sue under. We saw the North Carolina Supreme Court, when it changed political hands, reinterpret their own state constitution to negatively affect voting rights, such that they reversed the decisions that the prior court had made the year before. So let's be very clear. Not every state constitution is our answer. That's why there is a federal constitution. That's why there's a federal amendment. That's why there's a federal statute called the Voting Rights Act of 1965 as amended. So it is imperative that we understand how really ugly this is. And Joshua, I am just incensed that these states, the 14 states that are supporting this decision, that they themselves, 7 of them, have cases involving racial discrimination in voting right now. And we know that they're using public funding. This is not coming out of their own private pockets, folks. They're using your money. They're using Black folks' money, Latino money, Asian money, Native American taxes and funds to bring these cases to deny those very groups their rights. And that they're using the authority of their states to do this. This is something that people need to understand, so they don't know that their states are doing this. I called a really good friend yesterday in the state of Florida who was flabbergasted when I told her that, no, this isn't just the Eighth Circuit in those 7 states. Your state, your attorney general, filed a brief saying this should be the law of the land. So what do we do about this, Joshua? How do we make sure our people are educated to fight back? What do we do so that people understand the importance of voting? Because this is all about who has been voted into power.
Yeah, and that's a great question and a great segue into the next point. But as you were saying earlier, Dr. Arnwine, I mean, Arkansas, unfortunately, is not one of those states that has a constitution that protects the voters, unfortunately. And similar to Denise, your case you just mentioned in Missouri, there's a case that I've been involved with here in Arkansas that is also on pause, and it is around voter assistance as well, because the law in Arkansas is that if you have a volunteer that's assisting a voter, if it's a language access issue, they can only help 6 people, and then that's it. So think about, you could have 20 volunteers, each one helps 6 people. That's it for the day, and that you use up that time and energy really, really quickly. So that's also a case that's on pause right now because of this decision, because we don't know what's going to happen with that. But you're right. We have to. You're totally right, Barbara. We have to vote out these people that are making these decisions, and have some folks in there that are going to look out for our groups, our minority groups, because I just worry about all the racial minorities, the immigrants, people who don't know how the system works, that were turned away from the polls, like my own mother was. And if I wasn't there to advocate for her, she would have just went home. So, to now take away the people's right to pursue these cases, to take away the right of organizations like the NAACP and the ACLU to file these cases, it's almost like out of sight, out of mind. Oh, we don't want to think about it. We don't want to worry about it. And if you think the Justice Department is going to know that these things are happening and they're going to swoop in and fix it, unlikely. Because as you said, the numbers themselves show that, 15 cases have been pursued by the Attorney General out of, 180-something. So it's just not going to happen. And it's really just taking away the power of the people in this instance. So to all the listeners out there, I would say get out and vote. You don't like how this looks. You don't like what's happening in your state, in our country. You have to get out and vote. Arkansas, unfortunately, is dead last in this country in voter turnout. It's dead last in voter registration. And look what we've got now going on. And we've got a governor. We've got statewide officials that don't advocate for the people, that don't try to protect our right to vote. And now, if the federal government's not going to do it and the state's not going to do it, what's going to happen?
And Josh,
we've got to do it ourselves.
That's a great point, Joshua. And I tell you, one of the things that Barbara and I were discussing with regards to the current status of that section of the Eighth Circuit's decision is that it really puts voters in a position where the U.S. Attorney's Office, as we've indicated, they've only taken up less than 10% of the cases that are dealing with Section 2. That would mean some 90+% of the cases would go, at this point, unheard, that there would be rights that would be trampled upon. And my question to you, though, Josh, is this, and Denise, I thought, brought it up and raised a really good point with regard to the state's constitution that they have there in Missouri that has a voter protection provision in it. Do you think it's wise, and is it even possible in the state of Arkansas to try to get a constitutional amendment on the ballot to petition to try to put in place some type of voting rights legislation for Arkansas voters?
It is possible, Daryl, and it's actually something that I've been working on with some other groups here in the state, some nonprofit organizations and some pro-democracy groups. But on that end as well, our rights are being gutted and taken away. In this last legislative session, a bill was passed that I spoke out against several times, but it was still passed, that raises the threshold to get constitutional amendments on the ballot as far as gathering signatures. Previously, it was 15 counties that you had to gather signatures from, and it was 25% of voters from 15 counties, and it was raised to 50% of voters from 50 counties. And Arkansas has 75 counties. So, in effect, that basically quadruples the amount of signatures needed to get a constitutional amendment on the ballot so that the people could vote on it. And again, with Arkansas's motto being, the people rule, that this is not indicative of that motto at all. And so there's been quite a few constitutional amendments that since that law was passed in this last legislative session, they've been trying to get on the ballot for November, and it didn't happen because they weren't able to gather the requisite number of signatures because that threshold increased so much. So, yes, it's possible, but it'll be a challenge on that front as well because the folks in power, they know the avenues that the people have. They know that, hey, they could get something on the ballot. Let's make it harder for them to get something on the ballot. Oh, they could take something to court. Let's take away their ability to take it to court. So it's very, very frustrating. But as Denise said, our ancestors fought for our right to vote. They fought for our ability to make decisions for ourselves and to create our own laws and to elect government officials that will be able to represent us and the needs of our community. And we just have to keep that fight up, the fight that our parents and grandparents and great-grandparents, all the rights they fought so hard for, we have to pick up that torch and continue that fight ourselves this generation.
Absolutely. And we will not lay down. We won't sit down. We're not going to allow this to happen. We must make sure that these anti-democracy forces are defeated. We'll be right back Don't you dare touch that dial. It is igniting change time.
News Talk 1450 WOL AM, where information is power.
Good afternoon. This WOL Traffic Update is sponsored by Whole Foods.